Hi, I'm Stephanie Michelle. I think that there's a good chance that we may be on the verge of an economic collapse this October of 2025. Specifically October 24th and October 28th of 2025. Indeed, astrologers such as Chris Brennan and Nick Dagan-Best on the Astrology Podcast have mentioned the similarities between 2025 and 1929, especially the stock market crash on October 24th of 1929, Black Thursday, and October 29th of 1929, Black Tuesday. See the Astrology Podcast. In both years, Venus went retrograde at the beginning of the year when the economy started to fail, and then the economy began to pick up during the summer but fell apart in the autumn. Donald Trump, during his so-called Liberation Day speech, mentioned some of these similarities: the tariffs, the stock market crash, and the Great Depression. Specifically, Black Thursday on October 24th of 1929, and also Black Tuesday on October 29th of 1929. It is also interesting that Andrew Ross Sorkin released his book 1929 just this week, subtitled Inside the Greatest Crisis in Wall Street History. Coincidence or providence? Of course, astrology is only symbolically predictive, and therefore we are dealing with archetypes connected to certain mathematical algorithms associated with astrology. And also, historically, the stock market crash of 1929 was not the exact same thing as the Great Depression, although they were intertwined. Indeed, obviously, the stock market crash of 1929 gave the sense of economic turmoil, which obviously caused panic and a run upon the banks between 1930 to 1933, where 9,000 banks failed in the pre-FDIC era. And of course, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of 1930 didn't help the situation, just like the Trump tariffs are not helping the situation today. Indeed, history rhymes, but it never repeats itself exactly. Now, I want to compare the zodiacal releasing for 1929 and today in 2025 in regards to October, because they are fascinatingly similar. Of course, I'm not referring to the level 1, 2, and 3 events, but rather only the level 4 dates. For 1929, we have the dates of October 24th in Leo and October 29th in Virgo. Similarly, for 2025, we have the dates of October 24th in Leo and October 28th in Virgo. Of course, the lot of fortune, the pars fortuna for the United States of America, is in Cancer. Therefore, Leo, a fixed sign, represents a completion period, and Virgo, a mutable sign, represents a preparatory period. And most economic analysts recognize that AI, artificial intelligence, is basically keeping the stock market afloat right now, but with the fear of an AI bubble about to burst. Now, astrology is the wisdom and the understanding of the nation of Israel that is in the visible sight of the nations of the world. Chachmathkem v'uvinathkem le'enei ha'amim, the Talmud, Tractate Shabbath 75a on Deuteronomy 4:6. Kishuv, Takufot v'Mazalot, calculations of horoscopes and zodiac constellations, which also refers to Isaiah 5:12, Po'al Ya'o Ma'aseh Yadayim, astrology being the work of Tetragrammaton and the acts of his hands. Of course, there is the infamous double-blind test of astrology conducted by Dr. Sean Carlson and published in Nature magazine on December 5th of 1985, where 28 astrologers were asked to match horoscopes with 100 psychological profiles, and where the result was no better than random chance. A failure of astrology? Of course, I would argue that this was before the renaissance of Hellenistic astrology with its mundane astrology, and relied instead upon modern psychological astrology with its sun sign emphasis. Little better than your daily horoscopes in popular women's magazines, and certainly not traditional astrology. Now, zodiacal releasing, or ZR, is an ancient chronokrator technique, only mentioned by Vettius Valens in his Anthologia, which he attributed to Abraham from the Bible. In Anthology 228, also designated as 230, and Anthology 4:11-12, also designated as 4:4, where it is referred to in Greek as aphesis, meaning to release, and where Valens also refers to it in Greek as apoluses, meaning to loosen the bonds, See Chris Brennan's Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune, Chapter 18. Now, the rabbinic tradition also refers to Abraham as being an astrologer. The Talmud, Bava Batra 16b, mentions that Abraham wore some kind of amulet around his neck, an Even Tovah, a precious stone, for the purpose of its Tagninuth, being a Hebrew form of the Greek term astrologia, astrology, and where this astrological tablet or amulet is referred to as his bat, his daughter, and where all of this refers to Kleros, the lot of fortune. Indeed, Firmicus Maternus also mentions this Chaldean Abraham in his Mathesis 229, where he mentions that Abraham was sapientissimus in sideribus, wise in all the constellations of the zodiac. Now, this Venus retrograde in 2025 also had two additional factors. This Venus retrograde being in Aries and Pisces, but also being connected to a Mars retrograde in Aries and Pisces, probably representing volatility, as well as a Mercury retrograde in Gemini and Cancer, probably representing diplomacy. Interestingly, there was also a Mars retrograde in 1993 in Gemini and Cancer, coinciding with the Waco crisis in Texas, along with a Mercury retrograde in Aries and Pisces in 1945, coinciding with the establishment of the Arab League in the wake of World War II. I also want to mention the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, where Abraham 3:1 mentions that Abraham had the Urim and Thummim around his neck, in the larger context of astronomy and presumably also astrology, since astrology and astronomy were essentially the same art and science in the ancient Near East. Now, the Bible also seems to mention an economic collapse in the latter days dispensation. Revelation 13:16-17, where it mentions the beast of the land of Israel, in distinction from the beast of the sea of the nations. Indeed, Revelation 17:15 clearly identifies the sea as a symbol for the Gentile nations of the world. And Revelation 20:10 probably identifies the beast of the land of Israel as the false prophet. And this false prophet clearly states that none shall buy nor sell unless they have the mark of the beast, agorasai e polisai, suggesting an economic collapse, where people are forced to receive the charagma to therio. The mark of the beast, his name and his number, 666. And Matthew 24:7 also mentions a famine, a limoi, and one of the worst famines, if not the worst famine in human history, which mentions a great tribulation, thlipsis megale. 2 Timothy 3:1-5 also mentions that the latter days dispensation shall be harsh. Eschates hemeres kalepoi, where people shall be lovers of self, philatoi, lovers of money, philagoroi, slanderous, blasphemoi, yet with a false form of godliness, appearing to be religious, morphosine Eusebius, basically appearing to be religious, and all being obvious traits of Donald Trump and his MAGA cult. For example, Revelation 13:5, where the beast of the sea of the nations, the so-called Antichrist, has a mouth that boasts of himself and slanders others, megala kai blasphemias. Donald Trump probably being the literal Antichrist personage of the Bible, arrived in his own Trump brand name as Jesus seemingly predicted in the Gospel of John, and the two horns of the false prophet probably being Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, who are Orthodox Jews who both appear meek like a lamb, but with a deceitful mouth like a dragon. And the Sea of the Nations is probably a reference to the United States of America as the melting pot of the world, where Babylon the Great from Revelation 18, Babylon he megale, is essentially the same but also distinct from Mystery Babylon the Great from Revelation 17, Mysterion Babylon ho megale, the former which shall be fallen into economic collapse, epicen. Of course, Babylon here is a symbol of the seven-hilled city of Rome, Christianity, and the revived Roman Empire. 1 Peter 5:13. And I would argue also the merchant harbor of New York City with United Nations headquarters. Of course, many academic biblical scholars would argue that there's no such thing as biblical prophecy. Scholars such as Dr. Bart D. Ehrman, Dr. James D. Tabor, and Dr. Dan McClellan, all of whom I deeply respect, all of whom argue that the apocalyptic literature, such as Revelation, refers to literature meant to provide hope and consolation with revenge fantasies for people being persecuted at the time. And this was certainly part of its original purpose. But whether true or not, some of these Jewish writers also believe that they were able to accurately predict the future. Is biblical prophecy true? I don't know. I'm an agnostic. I believe that supernaturalism is an absurd superstition. However, I also believe that there are many things that our current science doesn't understand. Josephus mentions that the Essenes were known for their knowledge of divine revelation, tes ton theon, imperius achiontai, and that Menachem the Essene had knowledge of the future, essenon meneamos, prognosin ek, theoton meloton. Jewish Antiquities 15:10-5. 379, and 373. And of course, there are the Dead Sea Scrolls, probably from the Essenes of the Qumran community. With the famous Habakkuk Pesher. The Hebrew term Pesher, of course, meaning an interpretation, which took older sections of the Bible and applied it to the modern context, as well as also probably a future context. For example, also the War Scroll, which seems to discuss a battle in the latter days dispensation. Of course, I was educated as a dispensationalist at Philadelphia Biblical University, influenced by the eschatology of prominent dispensationalists such as Dr. J. Dwight Pentecost, Things to Come, and Dr. John F. Walvoord, Israel and Prophecy. As well as my professors at the Institute of Jewish Studies for the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry, Dr. O. Herb Hurt, Dr. William Cruson, and Dr. Reynolds Showers. And of course, the popular writings of Dr. Grant R. Jeffrey. May her boobies satisfy you always, and with her love may you always sin. Proverbs 5:19. Thank you for coming and watching me tonight. In the Aramaic language of the Sefer Zohar, the Book of Radiance, Ta Kazeh, come, see. Shalom, peace.